The first thing I noticed that afternoon wasn't the silence. It was the heat thick pulsing, almost alive, curling along the walls like invisible hands and settling against my skin, as if it had been waiting for me. I stood in the middle of my living room, the air unmoving, the ceiling fan spinning uselessly overhead, and for a moment I wondered whether the house was trying to tell me something. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe the loneliness, or maybe I had simply grown too used to hearing nothing at all. Evan had been gone for 4 days, off on another trip packed with conferences and hotel rooms, and I had convinced myself I didn't mind. But when the AC died, when the walls radiated heat like they were punishing me, I realized silence can feel very different when you have no one to share it with. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and forced a laugh, trying to pretend the weight in my chest wasn't there. I tried everything I knew, tapping buttons, checking breakers, whispering a plea or two, but the machine refused to listen. The house was an oven, and I was the only thing inside it still trying to breathe. I had just poured myself a glass of cold water when the doorbell cut through the stillness, sharp and unexpected. The sound startled me so abruptly that I almost dropped the drink. Nobody was supposed to be here. Nobody ever came without calling first. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. A woman alone in a quiet house had every reason to pretend she didn't hear a surprise knock. But curiosity can be stronger than comfort, and maybe I was hungry-starved, even for something that broke through the monotonous rhythm of heat and silence. I walked toward the door, the glass sweating in my hand, my pulse louder than it should have been. When I opened it, sunlight flooded in, blinding and thick. And behind that bright glare stood a figure I hadn't expected to see again so soon. Caleb, Jason's old college friend, stood on my porch, like he had stepped straight out of a memory I hadn't meant to revisit. His shirt clung to him from the heat, his hair damp at the edges, and for the briefest moment, the world outside felt even hotter than the world inside. "Hey, Mrs. Hawley," he said, voice low, warm, familiar. "Jason told me your AC was out. Thought I'd stop by and take a look." I hesitated, not because I feared him, but because something in his presence tugged at a place inside me I hadn't opened in a long time. His kindness was never the problem. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. The house felt too quiet, and I felt too seen. Still, the heat wrapped around me like a warning, pushing me toward practicality. "That's thoughtful of you, Caleb," I managed, stepping aside. "Come in before you melt."
He laughed softly, an easy sound that filled the doorway.
"Trust me, I already have." He wiped his forehead with the back of his arm and stepped inside, the warm scent of sun and sweat drifting with him. I told myself not to notice. I told myself it was just the heat messing with my focus. I told myself a lot of things that didn't quite feel true when he returned with his toolbox. He moved through the hallway with a confidence that made the house feel smaller, as if he brought the summer sun in with him. He crouched beside the AC unit, sleeves pushed up, forearms flexing as he worked, tools clinking in steady rhythm. I sat nearby, pretending to read an old magazine even though the words swam uselessly on the page. The heat wasn't the only thing thickening the air between us. There was something else, something quiet, unspoken, the kind of awareness that slips under the skin before you realize it's there. A drop of sweat slid down his temple, and without thinking, I lifted my glass to take another sip, anything to distract from the strange flutter rising in my chest. "You're good at this," I said lightly, hoping my voice sounded casual. "Ever think of doing it for a living?" He glanced up, eyes catching mine for a moment longer than they should have. "Nah," he said, wiping his forehead with a slow drag of his fingers. "Just something I picked up. Comes in handy, though." That moment, just a second or two left, a faint tremor behind, something I felt in my pulse, something I tried to blink away. I shifted my gaze to the ceiling fan again, pretending I hadn't noticed the warmth crawling up my throat. The house groaned softly as if it were listening. Every sound felt amplified, the scrape of his tools, the quiet shift of his weight, the low hum of the dying unit. Silence used to soothe me, but that afternoon it had teeth. It bit down on every insecurity I had spent years learning to ignore. I didn't want to call it attraction. It was awareness. Awareness that someone was standing in my home, noticing me in ways Evan hadn't in far too long. Awareness that I wasn't invisible after all. Marriage doesn't fall apart in a single day, it unravels slowly, thread by thread, in quiet rooms and tired conversations. Evan's absences weren't the cause. They were a symptom. The truth was harder, somewhere along the way. Our intimacy had faded into routines, our connection smoothing into polite exchanges and predictable nods. And here, in my overheated living room, someone else's presence was revealing just how empty things had become. Then with one final adjustment, the AC sputtered, coughed, and finally roared back to life. Cool air poured out like a blessing, brushing against my skin in a way that nearly made my eyes close. Relief washed over me so powerfully I almost forgot that Caleb was still standing there. "There you go," he said, rising to his feet. "Good as new." "Thank you," I breathed, and I meant it in more ways than one. For the breeze. For the company. For the distraction I hadn't realized I needed. He didn't move right away. He stood there, tools in hand, his gaze holding just enough warmth to make me look away. I forced myself to speak. "Let me get you something cold to drink." Retreating to the kitchen felt like stepping out of a storm. I poured iced tea into a glass, pausing when I noticed my hands weren't as steady as they should have been. When I returned, Caleb had moved closer than before, close enough that our shadows overlapped on the floor. As I handed him the glass, our fingers brushed light, fleeting, but enough to send a quiet jolt up my arm. I pulled my hand back quickly, covering the reaction with a polite smile I didn't quite feel. He didn't comment.
He didn't need to. I watched him take a slow sip.
His chest rising and falling with steady breaths, and for a moment the air felt too cool, too still, too deliberate. Then, just as the room settled, the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then everything blinked into shadow. The AC hummed in the dimness, but the rest of the house sank into a soft, electric silence. The sudden darkness wrapped around us, pressing close, drawing every line of tension into sharper focus. Caleb looked at me, his voice dropping slightly. "You okay?" I nodded, though my pulse betrayed me. Just wasn't expecting that. The truth was, the darkness felt like a question one I wasn't ready to answer. I could feel it settling inside me, mingling with the cool air, tightening the space between us. And in that suspended moment, I realized the real danger wasn't the heat wave or the broken AC. It was the quiet shift happening inside my own chest. Something deeper, something I wasn't prepared to face. The lights stayed off. The air kept humming. And the space between us held its breath, waiting, wanting for something neither of us dared to name.